why AEC firms need a very clear and successful learning strategy in today's world. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right into things. And let's just take a quick tour through the agenda. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction of who I am and who Eagle Point Software is, where I work. Then we're going to talk about how three different types of situations are impacting our environment right now, and really why learning is going to be an important role to help with this. Starts with employee retention, then digital transformation, and then just rework and errors. So we'll kind of unpack those things with some data and some studies that we've uncovered. And then we're going to spend just a minute or two talking about how much is the right amount of time to provide your staff for training. Most leaders in the AEC community know that it's important to provide training time for their staff, but it's always hard to justify how much that should be because there's a clear disconnect, or there's a clear competition, I should say, between billable hours and training time. And then lastly, we'll wrap things up with my recommendations on what are some key elements that should be included in your learning strategy. So with that said, just briefly about me. I'm Steve Biver. I've been with Eagle Point now for about 16 years or so. I've been a member of the AEC community for about 19 years. And today I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Eagle Point. Really, my passion in life is around AEC technologies. I grew up with it. At the very beginning of my career, I started as a support technician, supporting various AEC technologies out there. I've trained thousands of people across North America on AEC applications. And then in the most recent times, I've been a member of the Eagle Point team. And our goal in life is really to provide scalable learning resources to the AEC community all across the world. Eagle Point Software as a whole, we've been around for a long time, since 1983. We're headquartered in the United States. However, we have a partner network all across the world, including in Ireland, that services and offers the Pinnacle series to the AEC and manufacturing communities. But getting past all of that, I made the comment earlier that AEC communities need a very solid e-learning, or sorry, not e-learning, but a learning strategy for their organization. And now is really the most important time to do that. It's more important than ever before. And we're going to start kind of, I guess, drilling into this concept of employee retention. It's in the news all the time now. Most organizations are feeling that now in the AEC community and outside of the community, but getting good talent inside of your organization and keeping them there is a challenge. And when you think about our staff, our architects, our engineers, our designers, our overall staff, they are our most important resource. So we need to invest in them. But why now? Why is it so hard now to keep employees happy, to keep them, in their seats doing their job? There's a lot of outward-facing challenges that are facing us. So the pandemic obviously is the first thing, easy thing to talk about, but that has caused a lot of work from home kind of environments. And working from home has its pros and cons, but we're kind of being forced into that. And when you work from home, loyalties are a little bit different. Engagement on the job is a little bit different. So it's challenging to keep people engaged and loyal to your organization. Also, we have, energy prices on the increase. We have inflation going on. All of that is causing people to rethink their priorities in life, rethinking their compensation packages. And what it's leading to is people leaving their jobs. Now, one other thing that doesn't get as much press as it used to is that the generations in the workforce are drastically changing. If you just look at this, little pie chart here, the millennials and the Gen Z generations are making up about 40% of the workforce now. That is a big portion of the overall workforce. And when you have these millennials and these Gen Z people, coming into the workforce, they have different, thoughts. They have different ways of thinking in terms of compensation, in terms of promotions and how quickly they should be promoted, office culture, work-life balance. All of those different types of aspects are a little bit different in the millennials and the Gen Zs than they have been in the past with baby boomers and Gen X. There's other things coming into the fold here. The older millennials, myself included, we're beginning to move into leadership roles. So we're starting to cause change with the same desires as the rest of the millennials and the Gen Z. We want change, we want different things. It's causing challenges for the overall business leaders to be able to provide and nurture those wishes. And a big part of that is around learning and development. They want more access to learning and development to further their careers. So the workforce is changing. I talked about the inflation. I talked about the pandemic briefly. Let's take some look at some real surveys and some real data here. We're going to go kind of all across the world, the different countries across the world, and talk about how people are leaving their jobs. Now, we'll start here in the United States, where I'm located. You can see from this graph, it's representing how many people are quitting their job over time. And it is on a steady increase there. The only real big dip that was evident is right after the pandemic. People got scared, they held on to their jobs, as hard as they could. But after that, it came right back. And now we're at a point in the United States where people are quitting or leaving their jobs at the highest level ever in history. Same thing in France. In 2021, third quarter of 2021, that's where my survey came from, highest on record for resignations. Down in Australia, the job switching rate is nearly 10% higher today than it was pre-pandemic. So that's a few different countries, but if you think about, across the overall global workforce, Microsoft actually did a pretty interesting study last year on a variety of different things. But one of the metrics that they came back with is that 41% of the global workforce is likely to consider leaving their job next year. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to leave their job. They're likely to consider it, but almost half of the employees are thinking about leaving. That's a challenge. That's a challenge for business leaders. It's going to impact our AEC community pretty highly, and we need to do something about that. So what does this all mean? It means that business leaders need to have a strategy to keep their employees engaged, keep them happy, keep them working for that organization. And there's all kinds of studies out there that show if you invest in your employees, specifically invest in them around learning and development, invest in them around career growth, they're more likely to stay with your organization than to leave and go to the next one. So we need to invest in our employees through learning and development, through a key learning strategy. Now, I like to share data in these types of presentations a lot, but I also like to bring it closer to home. So here's a little story from one of our customers. The name of the customer is HBG Design. To give you a little context of who HBG is, they're one of the top 10 ranked design firms in the United States. They have about 100 architects and interior designers through 3 offices across the United States. And a couple of years ago, they made a pointed effort to build a learning strategy around specifically Revit in their case. That learning strategy included assessments and training, e-learning training at first, but they trained up their entire staff in 2020 through this learning strategy. Then in 2021, they began to evolve it and grow it into something a little bit bigger. They brought in more live events in addition to the e-learning and the assessments. And they started to build an onboarding program as well to bring new staff in and onboard them more effectively, more efficiently than before. All of that was going very well. They were getting good feedback from their internal employees. So it was very positive. The interesting thing here, though, as they started to realize this was helping their recruiting efforts, was helping them bring good talent into their office, into their organization. And the reason why is people were talking. They were starting to interview candidates for these new roles. And the candidates were telling them, hey, I heard through the word of mouth that you have a good learning strategy. You have a learning program that you allow your new employees to go through, your existing employees to go through, and it brought good talent in and allowed them to hire more talent, better talent than ever before. So not only was a learning strategy in their case positive for just current employee retention, but it was also helping for a recruiting sense because they were growing. They needed to bring people in to take on these new roles, and it helped from a recruiting sense as well. So a learning strategy, it helps in a lot of different kind of from points of view around employee retention. Now let's switch gears a little bit. Digital transformation. It's a buzzword. It's a word that we've been using for many years now. Many AEC organizations are currently going through a digital transformation. And the way that I look at digital transformations, it's a little bit different, I think, than what a lot of people kind of understand it. So I wanted to kind of give you my opinion on digital transformations and kind of what this means. And then we're going to go into a little bit of data about it as well. So I believe the AEC community has been in a digital transformation now for 40 years. Since the 80s, we've been transforming digitally on how we do our work. In the early 80s, we were on drafting boards, paper and pencil, and the old way of doing things. Then we moved to AutoCAD. That was a digital transformation. We just didn't have the term back then. We moved to AutoCAD. After that, we moved into 3D modeling applications like Revit and Civil 3D. Then terms around BIM were coming out and then gaining a lot of force and all of that. Now we're talking about AR, VR, digital twins. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about new technology concepts. We've been in a digital transformation for a long time, and it's never going to end. It'll be a bad day when digital transformations are truly ending. So digital transformations are here forever. I also look at it as not necessarily a technical problem or a technology problem. Digital transformation is a people problem. It is all about building adoption of new technology, upskilling staff to use new technologies in an efficient way, in an effective way. Digital transformation is a people problem. Now, with that kind of concept in mind, let's look at a little bit of data here. None of this is probably going to be shocking to you, but the concept of BIM, if we just look at BIM, BIM is growing like wildfire. It's being adopted more and more every year. These studies that show a couple data points there has it stating that 80 or 90% of projects in the MEP and structural engineering worlds are going to be adopting BIM in the next couple of years. We all know this. BIM is growing. A part of the main point of this conference is to talk about BIM coordination and all of that. It's a growing concept, and it's a digital transformation. The more shocking item that I want to really talk about, though, is the last bullet there. From this study based in the UK last year, only 9% of companies said they trained their staff on technology they invested on during the previous year. So 9% of organizations train their staff on technology. That's almost scary in my mind. 91%, and this is probably a bit extreme here, this study, but 91% of these organizations are not investing in training to help their people adopt these digital transformations. There's something backwards on that. Because if you go back to my statements, digital transformation is a people problem. It's not a technology problem necessarily. So what do we do with all of this? What does that mean to us? In my opinion, most organizations, and what I've heard, most organizations, when they're going through a point-in-time digital transformation, they're going to build a plan for that. That plan is going to include all kinds of technical aspects of how do you install the application, how do you morph the application to fit your company's standards, et cetera. And usually it doesn't do a great job of actually building learning into that plan. And that's where a lot of digital transformations fail. At the beginning, my recommendation is build learning into the plan from the start. Nominate some internal experts so that you have some internal people that you can rely on that know this technology inside and out to be able to train your staff on an ongoing basis and arm them with some resources. They can't do it all themselves. Arm them with some resources and other ways of being able to train their staff. And the key thing that is kind of timeless of people kind of stumbling on is don't expect one single training event to actually work in terms of training somebody on a digital transformation. It's an ongoing thing. Very commonly, we'll adopt a new technology package or a new feature set or something like that. And the default for many years has been, okay, let's schedule a 2 or 3 day training event for our staff. Get them all trained up on these feature sets, and then they're going to magically use that new technology from that day forward. That's not how it works. Those training events, what happens is they'll go to that training event, whether it's digital today over a webinar or an event like this, or if it's in person, When we go to that training event, they'll learn a lot of really good things. They'll get a great introduction to that technology. And then what happens next is they go back to their office or back home to do their work, and they go back to their old habits. They use their old technology, or they use the new technology the wrong way, and it causes, errors later on. We need to build into this plan a long-term ongoing learning effort, learning strategy, so that people can, be upskilled throughout the overall digital transformation until it becomes truly habit. And I mentioned some errors. I mentioned kind of rework just at the very tail end of that. For a moment, just let's forget about outside impacts. Let's forget about inflation. Let's forget about just the tendency of people leaving jobs more often than not, more often than ever before anyways. Let's forget about digital transformations. Let's think about the current state of things. I'd be willing to bet in your company, there's really, really smart, hardworking people, whether they're engineers, architects, designers, just general staff, whoever they might be. They're really doing their best to design, to build, to engineer the next cool thing, right? The next infrastructure project, the next building project. They're really doing, their best to, design those projects. That's great. I'd also be willing to bet a good percentage of them are making errors right now. A good percentage of them are not following your corporate best practices, your corporate workflows. And what that's going to lead to down the road is rework. And rework means, more money, more time invested into this project. So really it's waste at that point in time. It's not a shocking thing to think about. Most of us have experienced the time where a problem happened on a project and it ended up costing money in the long run. Rework costs in our industry a lot of money. And this is a really wide range here, but 2% to 20% of a total contract value or amount kind of goes towards rework. That's a lot of money. We work on big projects in this industry. That's a lot of waste there. Now, a study from some time ago by PlanGrid stated that in the United States, because of rework, because of errors, it costs, generally construction $31 billion in 2018 because of all these rework and errors. That's a problem that we can focus on right now. Now, at the same time, there's no silver bullet answer here. I can't sit here and say having a clear learning strategy will solve all of this and recoup all of that waste. That's not reality. However, we still can do some things around this. So it starts with, training on the technology. Of course, you need to train the people on the technology so they know how to use the tools in front of them. That we touched on a little bit earlier. But we also need to train the staff and then retrain the staff and retrain the staff on your corporate best practices, your standard operating procedures. We here at Eagle Point use the term workflows a lot. Train your staff on those workflows so that they're doing the things the right way the first time rather than having to redo it later on. Build in quality control checks into your workflows to ensure that there's no errors being created in your, early on in those projects. Document those things, train on them, and your rework, your errors will lessen over time. I have a really good example of this. So we work with a firm here in the United States named LPA Design Studios. Again, to give you a little context around them, they have 6 studios scattered across the United States. They're made up of about 400 architects, engineers, and designers. And a gentleman by the name of Alejandro Lopez met with me a few months ago, talked about this project. But what they did is they targeted a learning strategy pointed specifically at 30 problem areas. So they identified 30 areas, 30 concepts that were causing commonly issues that led to errors, that led to rework down the road. So they put that learning strategy together, they targeted those 30 concepts, and then they executed, right? They trained their staff on those 30 concepts and retrained them on it. And what they found in literally just 1 year, their organization saved $500,000 from that learning strategy because it improved those key areas that they were causing errors and issues. This is a fantastic story to kind of think about because in my industry, in my world, I talk about learning and development, every day of my life. It's not always easy to come up with tangible results. Everybody knows training your staff is a good thing. Everybody knows providing a learning strategy would be a good thing, but it's hard to justify, how far to go with that because it's hard to get tangible results. In this example, very tangible, very clear. They saved $500,000 from their learning strategy only at targeting 30 concepts. If we build that more, maybe we would save more money. So interesting story there. Now, learning strategies, they take some work. They take some time to plan and to implement. They take a lot of different aspects or key elements that are included in a learning strategy. One of those is how much time is the right amount of time for training. We always have this competition between billable hours. AEC organizations, they want the billable hours at as high as possible because that's where the revenue comes from. That's where the profits come from. But we know we need to provide some training time in order to learn these new technologies or work on these errors, upskilling people. How much time is the right amount of time? Well, I'm going to give you my opinion on this, but before I do that, we did do a study of some of our customers a couple months ago. And I have a few quotes just shared on this screen on what they said about this question here. But not surprisingly, we got a wide range of responses. Some organizations had a very thorough onboarding program, 2 to 3 months of onboarding, and then nothing after that. Once they're onboarded, project work all day, every day. Other organizations didn't even provide an onboarding program. It was nothing. Just go to work, you'll learn on the job, and go figure it out. And then we had a lot of organizations that talked about, 10 hours a year was their average of how much training time they would provide. A couple of organizations would do a couple hours per week, or 2 to 4 hours, a week would be ideal, but we can't quite get there quite yet. So it was a wide range of things. So let me give you my kind of thoughts on what should be included in a learning strategy, including how much time should be spent. So let's take a step back here and talk about onboarding. You, of course, need to have an onboarding program. It takes a lot of mind share to come into a brand new organization and figure things out. Provide your staff with time, provide them with overhead time so they can have a couple of months learning and training on your workflows, your best practices, forgetting old habits that don't match with your workflows. Allow them to be, mentored early on and provide a really good onboarding program. That's step number one. Step number two is, of course, sitting here today, I'm going to recommend to you, you need to have ongoing training and an ongoing learning strategy in the organization. My recommendation, at least a place to start, is 2 hours per week. Again, this is an average. It's not literally 2 hours every single week. There'll be ebbs and flows to this. But on average, my recommendation is 2 hours per week to provide your staff with time to upskill, to train. And the reason why I chose 2 hours per week is, number one, based on the study, it was kind of an average of what people were doing out there for our customers. And also, when you start to reflect back on why we're doing this, one of the reasons is around employee retention. We want to keep good staff inside of our walls. How do we do that? Well, we invest back into them. If we invest into them with a learning program, they'll stay, right? That's the theory here. Well, giving them 2 hours to upskill, to work on their career, to learn new technologies, that's investing in them. They'll see that and they'll want to stay longer. Digital transformations. We are going through digital transformations really all of the time. It's kind of a never-ending cycle. This provides a little bit of time every week to upskill on those new technologies. And then finally, talking about teaching your staff, your company best practices and workflows, it provides some time every week to work on that as well. So again, 2 hours per week. I would ask for more if I could get more, but it's a great place to start. And then finally, just a concept to think about. Adopting a learning strategy is not like you can just snap your fingers and get it done. There's a lot of thought that needs to be put into this, and a really good implementation needs to be put together. A plan needs to be put together so that it can be successfully adopted across the organization. That implementation needs to have buy-in from the top down. Everybody needs to really buy into this, because at the end of the day, what happens, and where sometimes these things fail, is that during the heat of a project manager is going to be on his people to make sure that the team is working on the project, getting it done on time. As soon as you ask that project manager to pull away 2 hours per week of training time, there's going to be some competition there. There's going to be some, argument over that, or debate over it at least. So we need buy-in top to bottom, project managers, leadership, employees, to provide that time and then hold people accountable to using that time. And again, I've been using the term learning strategy quite a bit here today. Let me give you just really high level the key elements that I believe should be included in most learning strategies. It starts with the learning platform, a place where you can house all of the training content that people can go to and get access to, whether they're on the job site, at home, or in the office, an easy access point for learning content. And also a place to be able to track the people's, use of the learning materials. How much time have they been spending in here, and hold them accountable to make sure they actually do leverage that time for learning. So you need that learning platform as kind of the central hub. And then my recommendation is also you need to have some pre-built learning content. In the AEC world, there's a lot of different technologies out there that require training and upskilling on. No organization, no matter how big or how small they are, has the resources to build all of the learning content. That would be a huge waste of money and huge waste of resources. So get access to pre-built learning content. You can subscribe to learning content that is specific to the AEC community. But also for larger organizations, build in time to build your own content. So we talked about your best practices, your standard operating procedures, your workflows. You need to document those things if they aren't already documented. You have to also keep them up to date as things change. So build in time to your strategy so that somebody or some resources can work on that. I also recommend include different types of modalities. E-learning alone isn't going to solve the world's problems. Live, scheduled training events in person aren't going to solve the world's problems. Get a variety of different modalities: e-learning, live events, webinars, conferences, mentoring, things like that. Build that all into your learning strategy. And then lastly, of course, the time that you're going to allocate for training, build that into your learning strategy right away. It's an easy thing to forget, but you need to have that in there right away so it's bought into from the leadership standpoint right away, and all the way up and down the ranks there. So now more than ever, for a variety of reasons, it's crucial to invest in the success of your team. So how do you invest in the success of your team? Investing in learning and development, a key learning strategy. If you're investing in your team, people will stay longer. They'll be more engaged and work harder for you. Digital transformations will be easier, and you're going to have less rework and errors. All of that is going to, in the end, be a positive return for your organization. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining me for this conversation. It was really my pleasure to talk a little bit about learning strategies for the AEC community. If you have any questions, I will be around today, and I will do my best to answer those questions. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.